The cornfield stretched as far as the eye could see, a golden sea rippling under the soft Kansas sun. Jake McAllister stood in the middle of it, squinting at the sky as a strange, metallic glint caught his eye. A city boy turned farmer, Jake wasn't easily spooked. He'd seen his share of crop circles and weather balloons. But this was different. The chrome spaceship descended gracefully, barely stirring the cornstalks as it landed with an elegant hum. Jake dropped his pitchfork, his jaw slack. He was ready to run, or maybe faint, he hadn't decided yet. Then the hatch opened. Out stepped Zyra, a 7-foot-tall alien with shimmering blue skin and bioluminescent veins glowing softly under the sunlight. Her elongated head framed wide, inquisitive eyes, and her long, flowing robes of silver and teal rippled like liquid metal in the breeze. Jake blinked. Well, I'll be damned. Zyra assessed her surroundings, her neural translator implant working overtime to parse the strange landscape and even stranger life forms staring at her. She straightened to her full height, adopting what she hoped was an authoritative but non-threatening stance. "I am Zyra of the Zalaxian High Council," she announced, her voice a melodic hum. "I come in peace to establish communication and mutual understanding between our species." Jake stared for a moment before remembering his manners, or at least a vague approximation of them. He raised a hand in an awkward wave. Hi. I'm Jake. Welcome to, Earth, I guess?" Zyra tilted her head, analyzing his words. The translator interpreted them as primitive but polite. Encouraged, she took a step closer, holding out a device resembling a crystalline cube. "This is a gift from my people," she said. "A token of our goodwill. It contains the knowledge of our civilization, encoded in light waves." Jake hesitated before taking the cube, turning it over in his hands. "Neat. Does it work like a Rubik's Cube, or?" Zyra blinked, her translator failing to provide context for this Rubik's Cube. She decided to ignore the comment. "In return, I request sustenance," she said. "It is customary among my people to share nourishment as a gesture of trust." Jake scratched his head, still processing the situation. "Sustenance? Oh, food. Yeah, sure. I was about to have lunch anyway." "You, eat food, right?" Zyra nodded, though she was growing wary. The translator suggested that lunch was a specific ritual involving consumption, but the nuances were unclear. Jake gestured toward his farmhouse. "Come on, I'll whip something up." Zyra followed, her steps graceful but hesitant. The closer they got to the house, the more nervous she became. Jake had said whip something up. Was this a colloquialism for preparing a prey item? Her scanners had detected high levels of protein-rich aquatic life in the nearby waterways. Could humans be carnivores? By the time they entered Jake's kitchen, Zyra's imagination was running wild. Her translator confirmed the presence of seafood, a term that seemed suspiciously close to descriptions of her own anatomy. The smells in the air were tantalizing but ominous. Jake moved around the kitchen, unaware of her inner turmoil. "I'll make some seafood stew," he said. "Hope you're not allergic." Zyra's nerves frayed further. "Seafood. Is that a term for sentient beings?" she asked cautiously. Jake paused, turning to look at her. "Sentient? No. It's just fish and stuff. Like shrimp, crab, maybe some lobster." Zyra flinched. "Lobster?" Her great-uncle back on Xylaxia had pincers like lobsters. The similarities were unnerving. She decided to be diplomatic. "I shall observe this preparation process," she said stiffly. Jake chuckled. "Suit yourself. It's nothing fancy." He laid out his ingredients and began chopping vegetables, humming a country tune. Zyra watched as he reached into a tank and pulled out a writhing lobster, oblivious to her growing horror. When he cracked the shell and dropped it into a pot, she gasped audibly. Jake turned, puzzled. You okay? Zyra forced a smile, though her face twitched with unease. Yes, I am. Observing. But in her mind, alarms were blaring. This wasn't a diplomatic meeting, it was a trap. The human was clearly demonstrating his dominance by dismembering a distant relative of hers. Was she next? Jake stirred the pot, the smell of the stew filling the air. Trust me, you're gonna love this, he said with a grin. Zyra didn't feel very trusting. She discreetly activated her personal shield, ready to defend herself if the human's hospitality turned into something more sinister. Zyra perched at the edge of the farmhouse kitchen table, her luminescent fingers resting tensely on the polished wood. Her heightened senses were flooded with the aroma of bubbling stew, rich and tantalizing but also profoundly alarming. Every movement Jake made, a knife slicing through an onion, the clatter of a ladle against a pot, felt like a prelude to her imminent doom. Jake, for his part, was thoroughly enjoying himself. He found the alien's wide-eyed fascination with his cooking process endearing. So, where you're from, he asked while stirring the pot, do you guys cook, or is it all, like, nutrient paste? Zyra hesitated. She couldn't exactly tell him that Zalaxian cuisine consisted largely of fermented goo and algae cultivated in zero-gravity vats. She decided to deflect. Our sustenance methods are efficient. Jake laughed, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Well, around here, we like to take our time with food. Makes it taste better. Zyra barely processed his words. Her attention was locked on the lobster claw he casually lifted, cracking it with a satisfying snap. Her mind raced. The human clearly found enjoyment in dismantling creatures similar in appearance to her kind. Was this some sort of ritualistic intimidation tactic? If so, she had to maintain her composure. Diplomatic failure was not an option. Jake set the table, placing a steaming bowl of stew in front of her. All right, dig in, he said cheerfully, sitting across from her. Zyra stared at the bowl. The contents glistened in the warm light, the broth rich with herbs and chunks of something she was sure was a cousin to Zalaxian shellfish. Her translator struggled to interpret the human's phrase, dig in, offering her unhelpful options like burrow aggressively or commence excavation. She opted for a cautious approach, lifting the spoon delicately. The first sip was extraordinary. The complex flavors exploded across her tongue in ways Zalaxian goo never could. Sweet, savory, and a touch of spice mingled in perfect harmony. For a moment, her fears evaporated, replaced by a rare sense of delight. This is, she started, struggling for words, acceptable. Jake chuckled. High praise from an alien. So, what do you think? Better than your space goo? At the mention of goo, Zyra's diplomatic instincts returned. She needed to redirect the conversation before he asked for details. Human cuisine is unique, she said carefully, taking another sip. Do you often consume beings with exoskeletons? Jake paused mid-bite, his brow furrowing. What, like shellfish? Yeah, all the time. Why? Zyra froze, her translator confirming that shellfish likely referred to a broad category of aquatic creatures, many of which bore a striking resemblance to her kin. Her earlier suspicions flared anew. Do you consider them sentient? She asked, her tone sharp. Jake set his spoon down, now genuinely confused. Sentient? No, not really. They're, like, instinct-driven. Delicious, though. Zyra's bioluminescent veins flared slightly, a sign of rising anxiety. And do you view all unfamiliar beings as edible? Jake leaned back, realizing she wasn't joking. Whoa, hold on. Is that what you're worried about? That I'm gonna eat you? Zyra's eyes narrowed. Your actions suggest as much. You have displayed the consumption of beings with similar physiological features to my kind. Jake burst out laughing, doubling over in his chair. You think I'm planning to eat you? Lady, no offense, but you look more like a glowing jellyfish than a lobster. Zyra bristled. That is not reassuring. Okay, let me clear this up, Jake said, raising his hands in surrender. We humans don't eat anything that talks back. Or glows. Or pilots a spaceship. You're safe, all right? Zyra steadied his face, her neural implant analyzing his tone and body language. The results suggested sincerity, but she wasn't entirely convinced. Then what is the purpose of this demonstration? She asked, gesturing to the stew. Jake blinked. Demonstration? Oh, you mean dinner? I'm just trying to make you feel welcome. This was unexpected. The human's intentions seemed genuine, even kind. Zyra felt a flicker of guilt for misjudging him, but quickly reminded herself to remain cautious. Trust was a dangerous luxury. I see, she said slowly, lowering her spoon. Perhaps I misinterpreted your customs. Jake grinned. No harm, no foul. Well, except for the lobster. His casual joke elicited a hesitant smile from Zyra, her tension easing slightly. She continued eating, savoring the stew's remarkable flavors while silently marveling at how different yet oddly compatible humans and Zalaxians seemed. As they finished the meal, Jake leaned forward, his curiosity bubbling over. So, what do you guys eat back home? You mentioned efficient food earlier. What's that mean? Zyra hesitated, unsure how to describe Zalaxian goo in a way that wouldn't horrify him. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, transparent canister filled with a viscous, shimmering substance. This is our primary source of nutrition, she said. It is nutrient-dense and sustainable. Jake inspected the canister, unscrewing the cap and giving it a cautious sniff. His face immediately scrunched up. Smells like low tide. Zyra bristled. It is a delicacy. Jake dipped a finger in, tasting the goo. His reaction was immediate, a full-body shudder. Good Lord, it's like licking a fish tank filter. Zyra's pride was wounded. It is an acquired taste. Jake laughed, shaking his head. Well, I'll stick to stew, thanks. Despite their vastly different palates, the tension between them dissolved into genuine camaraderie. For the first time, Zyra felt a flicker of hope that diplomacy between their species might actually work if she could survive Earth cuisine, that is. The farmhouse's kitchen was warm and filled with the savory scent of Jake's seafood stew. Zyra leaned back in her chair, her initial anxiety giving way to an unexpected sense of satisfaction. The meal, though unnervingly sourced, had been undeniably delicious. She watched as Jake cleared the table, still laughing at her reaction to his attempt to taste Zalaxian goo. I'm just saying, Jake teased, stacking bowls in the sink, if you ever decide to introduce that stuff here, you might want to market it as industrial adhesive. Humans don't eat things that stick to the roof of their mouth like that. Zyra folded her hands primly, though her bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly with amusement. On Xylaxia, it is considered a rare treat. Perhaps Earth palates are underdeveloped. Jake shot her a playful look. Yeah, sure. Earth palates are why people travel thousands of miles for barbecue. Zyra tilted her head, intrigued. Barbecue? Oh, you're in for a treat, Jake said. But first, let's make sure you're not allergic to Earth spices. I don't want you glowing red instead of blue. His humor disarmed her. It was fascinating how easily humans infused lightheartedness into serious moments. It was a stark contrast to the rigid formality of her own people. As she observed Jake bustling around the kitchen, she felt a growing curiosity about this species so crude and chaotic, yet strangely compelling. As night fell, Jake and Zyra moved to the porch, where the sky stretched endlessly above them, painted with stars. Zyra's luminous veins glowed faintly, blending with the soft yellow light of fireflies dancing in the cornfield. Jake handed her a glass of lemonade, explaining it was a human staple for warm evenings. Zyra sipped cautiously. The tangy sweetness startled her taste buds, but she found it oddly pleasant. "This is refreshing," she admitted, her glowing veins pulsing softly in approval. Jake grinned. "Glad you like it. It's one of the few things around here that doesn't involve boiling or frying." Zyra raised an eyebrow, her translator struggling to decipher his comment. She decided to ask a question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you invite me to share a meal? Was it purely out of obligation, or curiosity?" Jake leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly. "A little of both, I guess," he said. "I mean, how often does a guy get to meet an alien, let alone cook for one? But mostly, it's just what we do around here. Hospitality's kind of a big deal." "Hospitality?" Zyra echoed. "Yeah. You know, making folks feel welcome. Doesn't matter if they're from the next town over or the next galaxy." Zyra considered this. On Xylaxia, such gestures were calculated, strategic. Kindness was often a means to an end. But Jake seemed genuine, his actions motivated by a simple desire to connect. It was refreshing, like the lemonade. "Your species is peculiar," she said finally. Jake laughed. "You're not wrong." As they sat in companionable silence, a flicker of movement caught Zyra's eye. She turned to see a raccoon boldly approaching the porch, sniffing the air. Jake laughed, tossing a piece of bread toward the animal. "That's Bandit. He's been stealing food from me for years." Zyra watched, fascinated, as the creature snatched the bread and scurried away. "You tolerate such behavior?" Jake shrugged. "He's just trying to survive, same as the rest of us." This simple philosophy struck Zyra deeply. On Xylaxia, such an act would be considered foolish, wasting resources on a lesser being. Yet here was Jake, demonstrating an empathy that extended beyond his own species. It was both bewildering and admirable. "You have a strange capacity for compassion," she said. "Even for creatures that offer you nothing in return." Jake smiled. "That's just how we're wired, I guess. Maybe it's why we haven't blown ourselves up yet." Zyra laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes. "Perhaps your species is more advanced than I anticipated." As the evening wore on, their conversation deepened. Jake shared stories of Earth's struggles and triumphs, from humanity's quest to explore the stars to their stubborn love for a good backyard barbecue. Zyra, in turn, spoke of Xylaxia's towering cities and the cold efficiency of her people's way of life. Despite their differences, they found common ground in unexpected places, an appreciation for curiosity, a love of discovery, and a shared sense of humor. For the first time, Zyra began to see Jake not as a potential adversary, but as an equal. Perhaps even a friend. When the stars began to fade into the soft glow of dawn, Zyra turned to Jake, her luminous eyes thoughtful. "You have given me much to consider, Jake McAllister. Perhaps our species are not so incompatible after all." Jake chuckled, stretching as he stood. "Glad to hear it. So, what's next for you? Back to your spaceship to write a report or something?" Zyra hesitated, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "I believe there is more to learn here. If you are willing, I would like to stay a while longer." Jake grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that. Something tells me you're gonna love barbecue." As they stepped back into the house, the first rays of sunlight illuminating the cornfields, Zyra felt a strange warmth she couldn't quite explain. It was more than the lingering taste of stew or the gentle hum of a planet awakening. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. The sun climbed high over the cornfield, casting long shadows as Jake and Zyra stood side by side, surveying the scene in front of the farmhouse. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, curious passers-by, and a couple of local journalists who'd caught wind of a weird glowing lady staying with Jake. Zyra's spacecraft gleamed in the distance, an unmissable silver beacon. "Are you sure about this?" Zyra asked, her glowing veins pulsing faintly with uncertainty. Jake adjusted his baseball cap, a grin spreading across his face. "Trust me. Nothing brings people together like good food." The two had spent the last week experimenting with a fusion of Zalaxian and Earth cuisine. Zyra's nutrient goo, mixed with Earth spices and slow-cooked techniques, had transformed into a rich, smoky sauce. Combined with Jake's barbecue skills, the result was something neither species had tasted before, and it was phenomenal. The first test meal had been a resounding success. Jake's neighbors, initially wary of Zyra, had quickly warmed to her after trying her Zalaxian barbecue glaze. Even Bandit the raccoon seemed to approve, sneaking scraps whenever he could. Now, standing on the farmhouse porch with a grill blazing nearby, Jake was about to introduce this intergalactic culinary marvel to a broader audience. The first bite the crowd murmured as Jake plated the first round of food char-grilled chicken coated in Zyra's glaze, garnished with fresh herbs from his garden. Zyra watched nervously as a skeptical farmer named Hank took the first bite. His expression shifted from cautious to wide-eyed delight. "Dang, Jake," Hank said, his mouth full. "This is incredible. What's in this sauce?" Jake winked at Zyra. "A little Earth, a little galaxy far, far away." Soon, the entire crowd was digging in, their initial apprehension giving way to laughter and compliments. Zyra found herself at the center of attention, answering questions about her world, her people, and the surprising compatibility of Zalaxian goo with Earth spices. "I never thought I'd say this," said one woman, holding up a rib coated in the glaze, "but I'd eat alien food any day." Zyra's glowing veins shimmered with pride. "I am pleased my species can contribute to your culinary diversity," she said, her melodic voice carrying easily over the crowd. Jake nudged her playfully. "Told you they'd love it." A business proposition. As the crowd thinned out, a man in a suit approached. He introduced himself as Tom Fletcher, a representative from a major restaurant chain. "What you've got here is groundbreaking," he said, gesturing to the grill. "I'd like to talk about franchising this. We could call it Galactic Grub or something catchy." Zyra raised an eyebrow, her translator struggling to interpret the slang. Jake stepped in, his smile fading slightly. "Appreciate the offer, but this isn't just about making money. This is about bringing people, species together." Tom blinked, clearly not expecting such a response. Sure, but imagine the reach. You could have locations all over the world. Maybe even off-world." Jake glanced at Zyra. "What do you think?" Zyra considered the offer carefully. "My mission here is diplomacy, not commerce. However," she added, her voice softening, "if this endeavor can foster understanding between our species, I am open to exploring its potential." Tom clapped his hands. "Great. Let's talk logistics. ET Eats here." A month later, Jake and Zyra stood in front of a brand new food truck parked at the edge of the cornfield. The truck, painted in shimmering silver with glowing blue accents, bore the name ET Eats Here in bold letters. Beneath it, the tagline read, "Earth meets Galaxy." Inside, the menu featured dishes like Zalaxian barbecue wings, Nebula nachos, and cosmic slaw, blending Zyra's nutrient goo with Earth flavors in creative and delicious ways. Lines of humans and a few Zalaxians, who had traveled to Earth after hearing about the culinary collaboration, stretched down the road. Jake worked the grill, flipping burgers and chatting with customers, while Zyra managed the front, her elegant demeanor drawing attention from reporters and curious diners alike. "You're a natural," Jake said during a rare quiet moment. "I had an excellent teacher," Zyra replied, her glowing veins pulsing softly. An intergalactic revolution. Word of ET Eats Here spread quickly. Soon, the food truck was joined by pop-up locations in major cities, each one staffed by a mix of humans and Zalaxians. The success of their culinary ventures sparked broader conversations about interspecies cooperation, leading to cultural exchanges, trade agreements, and even joint scientific endeavors. For Zyra, the experience was transformative. She had arrived on Earth expecting hostility and fear, but found warmth, humor, and connection instead. Jake, too, discovered a newfound purpose, using his cooking skills to bridge gaps he never imagined could be crossed. One night, as they closed up the food truck after another successful day, Jake leaned against the counter, looking at Zyra with a grin. "So, what's next? Think we should open a place on Xylaxia?" Zyra laughed, the sound like wind chimes. "Your spices would be revolutionary there. Though I suspect my people might take some convincing." Jake shrugged. "Hey, if we can get Hank to eat alien goo, we can get your people to try barbecue." Zyra smiled, her glowing eyes softening. "Perhaps. But for now, I am content to continue this journey with you." As they gazed at the stars, the possibilities seemed endless. Together, they had not only built a bridge between their worlds, they had built a future where the universal language of food brought people, planets, and possibilities together.